Chapter 1. Ashes on the cold street. The cellar, situated beneath the East End streets of London, had never known the warmth of the sun. It was damp year-round, reeking heavily of mud blown in from the docks, mingled with the pungent smell of beef tallow, coarse beeswax, and cheap herbal scents. Florence Mercer hunched over the small terracotta furnace, her pale gray eyes reflecting the flickering red flames, licking the bottom of the soot-blackened copper pot. She carefully used a large wooden spoon to evenly stir the lightly boiling, golden-yellow beeswax mixture. The rising steam carried the gentle fragrance of dried lavender and pine needles, somewhat dispelling the bone-chilling cold of the impending Mayfair winter morning. "Sister Florence, this cotton wick has been woven. Do you think this length fits the wooden mold?" Mabel, Florence's 10-year-old sister, whispered as she held out a meticulously hand-braided bundle of cotton wicks. The little girl's small hands were flushed red from the cold, her finger crevices still clinging with a bit of white wax residue. Florence stopped stirring, smiled gently, and received the wick bundle. She lightly stroked each cotton strand, sensing the firmness and the cross-weaving distance of the threads. Her father, the late royal candlemaker Albert Mercer, had always taught that the wick was the soul of the flame. If woven too loosely, the candle would burn quickly and emit a lot of black smoke. If woven too tightly, the flame would gradually die out in the pool of hot wax. And most importantly, for the specialized wind-proof candles her father had once researched, the wick had to be soaked in a herbal mineral salt solution before weaving to ensure the cotton threads would not be thickly coated with ash and suffocate the flame. "You did very well, Mabel. Let's arrange them into the oak molds. We need to finish these 20 pure wax candles before the Mayfair fog completely dissipates. Today is the first day of the winter market in the commercial district. We must not be late," Florence said, her voice clear and composed, even though her shoulders were aching from bending over for 4 continuous hours. The two sisters silently coordinated their work in the cramped space of the cellar. Florence carefully poured the melted beeswax into each oak mold that Mabel had pre-threaded with wicks. Each honey-yellow stream of wax flowed evenly, radiating a gentle warmth. This was the purest natural beeswax that Florence had saved up for weeks to buy from the beekeepers in the Surrey outskirts. She absolutely refused to use cheap animal tallow wax full of impurities and a pungent foul odor like the industrial candle workshops in the slums often did. To her, every Mercer candle made was not just a tool for illumination, but the honor of her father who had unjustly died in the Newgate debtors' prison 2 years ago. Albert Mercer was once the most renowned candlemaker in London, the one who held the formula for creating smokeless, hypoallergenic wax candles exclusively for aristocratic mansions. But his success had aroused the greed of his competitors. Marquess Cedric Ashbrook, who held the majority of the cheap industrial candle workshops in the East End, had falsely accused Albert of supplying arsenic-laced candles that deteriorated the health of a Secretary of State. The wrongful conviction struck down swiftly like a lightning bolt. The Mercer candle workshop was sealed, their assets confiscated, and Albert passed away in the desolate, cold dungeon due to lung disease after only 3 months of imprisonment. Florence and Mabel were thrown out onto the streets empty-handed, bearing the stigma of being the daughters of a poisoner. Florence tightened her worn-out woolen scarf as she stepped up the damp stone stairs to reach the surface. On her shoulder was a small wooden chest, containing the finished candles carefully wrapped in oil paper. Mabel trotted beside her, holding a small basket of tiny scented wax samples for customers to smell. The bustling Mayfair winter market appeared before their eyes, with luxurious carriages gliding past on the cobblestone streets. Noble ladies wearing warm fur coats and high-ranking gentlemen wearing top hats were strolling beneath the awnings covered in white snow. Florence found a small corner beside the stone wall of an antique bookshop, carefully displaying her Mercer beeswax candles on the small wooden table. Her candles possessed a natural golden color, their surface smooth as jade, entirely different from the cloudy gray, bubble-filled animal tallow candles piled up at the adjacent stalls. Buy pure, smokeless natural beeswax candles, ladies and gentlemen. Lavender-scented candles help soothe the mind and purify the bedroom air. Mabel called out her wares softly, her eyes shining with hope. A few lazies stopped, attracted by the elegant herbal fragrance radiating from Florence's table. They picked up the candles to examine, nodding in admiration at the exquisite finish and the pleasant scent. But just as they were about to draw their money to pay, a hoarse, mocking voice rang out from behind the crowd. "I advise you all to be careful with those beautiful candles. Do not let their appearance deceive you. just like how her father deceived the entire London aristocracy. The crowd parted to the sides. Lord Cedric Ashbrook stepped forward, draped in a luxurious black velvet cloak trimmed with fox fur, his hand holding a silver-knobbed cane tapping sharply against the snow-covered street. The middle-aged man's face was full of wrinkles of cunning and contempt. Following behind him were 3 burly subordinates with menacing expressions. Florence felt the blood in her body seemingly freeze upon seeing the face of the man who had destroyed her family. She stood straight, her hands tightly gripping the edge of the wooden table to keep herself from trembling before his hateful gaze. "Lord Cedric," Florence spoke in a cold and proud tone, "this is the free market of Mayfair. I handcrafted these candles myself from the purest Surrey beeswax. They are completely clean and safe." "Clean?" Cedric laughed aloud, the piercing sound ringing out amidst the crowded street. "Your father also said the same before offering candles laced with toxic arsenic onto the desks of the secretaries of state. Your Mercer bloodline is inherently tainted with deceit and poison. Do you think the London aristocracy would be foolish enough to buy the rubbish of a murderer?" The people around began to whisper and discuss. The customers who had just held Florence's candles hurriedly placed them down on the table as if they were scorching hot coals, then stepped back with suspicious and disgusted eyes. "My father was falsely accused, and you know very well who was the one behind that curtain. Lord Cedric." Florence raised her voice, her gray eyes flashing with a flame of anger. She would not allow him to insult the soul of her late father before everyone. Cedric's face darkened. He took a step forward, using the tip of his silver-knobbed cane to overturn Mabel's basket of scented wax. The scented wax blocks shattered into pieces, rolling about on the dirty snow. Mabel cried out, hastily kneeling down to try and pick up the wax fragments. "Insolent brat," Cedric yelled, turning to his subordinates. "Clean up this filthy stall. We cannot let the reputation of Mayfair be tarnished by this toxic rubbish." The 3 subordinates immediately charged forward. One man roughly pushed Florence, sending her tumbling onto the freezing cold ground. The second man used his hands to flip over the small wooden table. All the natural beeswax candles that Florence had spent countless sleepless nights casting spilled onto the street, mercilessly trampled by their rough leather boots. The golden yellow candles snapped in half, sinking into the filthy snow-slush mud of the London street. "Stop! Please stop!" Florence cried out. She tried to force herself up but was blocked by a subordinate standing before her with a threatening gaze. She could only watch helplessly as the labor of the 2 sisters was trampled into a pile of filthy ashes. Cedric looked at the crushed candle wax beneath his feet, smirking triumphantly. He leaned his head down close to Florence, whispering in a venomous voice, "This is only the beginning. Miss Mercer, as long as you dare to linger around this London, I shall ensure you must live like rats in a dark sewer. The Mercer line shall forever be buried in darkness and humiliation." Having said that, Cedric turned his back and walked away with his subordinates, leaving Florence kneeling on the cold snow, her hands covered in bleeding scratches from trying to pick up the frayed pieces of candle wicks, while the surrounding crowd began to disperse with the cold indifference of high society. Chapter 2. The flame in the rainy night. The late afternoon rain poured down on London in torrents, washing away the remnants of the winter market, but unable to soothe the cold seeping deep into Florence's body. She and Mabel huddled together beneath the narrow stone awning of the antique bookshop. Florence's long hair was soaked, plastered tightly to her cheeks that were pale from cold and hunger. Amidst the mud and rainwater, she only managed to pick up a few snapped and chipped candles, the remaining fragments of their sole hope to pay the rent for the damp cellar this week. "Sister Florence, I am so cold. Our cellar will surely be locked by the landlord tonight if we have no money," Mabel whispered, the little girl's body trembling violently in her thin, torn coat. Florence hugged her sister tightly into her chest, trying to use her meager warmth to shelter the little girl. Her tears mixed with the rainwater streaming down her cheeks. She had never felt as desperate as this moment. The injustice of society, the cruelty of Cedric Ashbrook, had backed the sisters into a corner with no way out. She looked at the broken candle in her hand, pulling out her father's old metal lighter from her pocket. She struck a spark, lighting that broken candle. A gentle golden light immediately flared up, radiating the familiar warm lavender scent. That tiny flame burned extremely steadily, even in the freezing wind sweeping through the stone crevices of the awning. Suddenly, the rapid sound of horse hooves rang out from the end of the deserted Mayfair street. A luxurious dark black carriage, bearing no clear family crest but drawn by 4 muscular black horses, glided through the rain and stopped right before the bookshop awning. The window curtains of the carriage were drawn tightly shut with thick black velvet, blocking any outside light from entering, and vice versa. The carriage door opened. A man dressed in somber butler attire stepped down, holding a large black umbrella. He quickly walked around to the back of the carriage door, bowing respectfully, as another figure stepped out of the pitch-black cabin. It was a tall man, draped in a dark cloak with a high fur collar concealing the lower half of his face. He stepped out of the carriage with an imposing demeanor. Every movement exuded the aura of supreme power and strict discipline. However, Florence noticed he walked very slowly, his right hand leaning slightly on a gold-knobbed black ebony cane, and he seemed to be trying to avoid looking at the street oil lamps swaying in the rain. It was Lawrence Ashbrook, Duke of Hartswood, the Duke dubbed the Shadowed Duke, or the Duke who fears the Night of London. Returning from the Waterloo battlefield with illustrious glory, but he also brought back a horrifying psychological trauma. Extreme fear of the dark, nyctophobia, combined with respiratory sensitivity to industrial toxic smoke. He could not endure the darkness even for a second, but cheap wax candles emitting a lot of black smoke caused him severe asthma and chest spasms. He lived isolated in a castle always brilliantly lit by the finest beeswax candles, but recently, his candle supply was being secretly poisoned by cheap lead-laced candles supplied by Cedric to harm him. Lawrence halted his steps upon smelling a pure, warm fragrance brushing past in the freezing rain. He turned around, his eyes sharp as a falcon looking straight into the dark corner of the awning, where Florence's broken candle was shining. That candle, Lawrence spoke in a low, hoarse voice but carrying an oppressive authority. The butler hurriedly shielded him with the umbrella, intending to step forward to chase the 2 sisters away. "Your Grace, they are merely poor vagrants." "Stop, Pringle," Lawrence raised his hand to stop him. He stepped closer to the awning, his eyes never leaving the tiny flame in Florence's hand. Strangely, that candle was burning amidst the sweeping wind and rain, yet the flame did not waver violently at all, and the rising smoke was completely transparent, radiating a lavender and herbal scent that caused his constricting chest to suddenly relax comfortably. Florence looked at the nobleman before her. She stood up, though her legs were still trembling. She curtsied formally, but her gray eyes retained a quiet pride. "My lord, this is natural Surrey beeswax candle handcrafted by me. The wick is treated with mineral salts to resist the wind and produce no toxic black smoke," Florence said, her voice clear and confident. Lawrence looked down at the crushed candle wax trampled in the mud, then looked at Florence's scratched hands full of calluses characteristic of a candlemaker. He immediately recognized who she was through the investigation reports on the candle workshops in London. "Mercer," Lawrence uttered softly. "Albert Mercer's daughter." "Yes, my lord. I am Florence Mercer, and my father was no poisoner," she answered, looking straight at him without a hint of fear. Lawrence remained silent for a long moment. His chest, which was always weighed down by suffocating spasms whenever night fell, now felt strangely relieved thanks to the fragrance from her broken candle. He was facing the risk of Cedric Ashbrook controlling the candle supply of Hartswood Castle to gradually push him into panicked darkness. This girl, with the talent inherited from her late father, was his only lifeline. "Pringle," Lawrence commanded in a cold but decisive voice. "Bring the 2 sisters into the carriage. We shall take them back to Hartswood." Florence looked at the Duke in astonishment. She hugged Mabel tightly into her chest, full of wariness. "Your Grace, we—" "Miss Mercer," Lawrence interrupted her, his eyes darkening beneath his hat brim. "Your father's enemy wants to destroy you on these London streets. And I need your smokeless candles to survive through the long nights of Hartswood. This is a fair bargain. I shall sponsor your identities and your lives. In exchange, you become the personal chandler for my castle. Your father's old candle workshop, I will help you rebuild it right within the castle grounds." Florence looked at the burning candle in her hand, then looked at her sister Mabel, shivering from the cold. She knew she had no better choice to survive. Her father's honor, Mabel's safety, and the chance to avenge Cedric all lay within this bargain. "I agree, Your Grace," Florence replied steadfastly. She blew out the candle, darkness temporarily enveloping them. But this time, she knew she was walking toward the new light of her life. Chapter 3. The Castle of Light. The dark black carriage ran all night through the bumpy trails of the windswept outskirts, finally stopping before the colossal iron gates of Hartswood Castle before dawn could break. The castle appeared like an ancient gray stone fortress, standing tall on the peak of a desolate hill, surrounded by old pine forests and shrouded in fog year-round. As Florence stepped down from the carriage, she was immediately struck by a strange sight. Across all the high windows of the castle, thousands of candles were burning brilliantly, casting warm golden streaks of light out into the gloomy gray fog of the early morning. Even the open-air corridors and the entrance to the carriage vault were fully hung with large candle-lit lanterns. Hartswood Castle seemed to be trying to banish every smallest dark corner from its presence, to protect the Duke from the melancholic night. "Welcome, Miss Mercer and little Mabel, to Hartswood," Butler Pringle said as he led them through the large oak doors of the main hall. Inside the castle, the magnificence and brilliant light made Florence even more astonished. Hundreds of gold-plated brass candle sconces were mounted along the stone walls, lighting large shimmering beeswax candles. However, Florence immediately frowned upon smelling a faint, acrid smoke mingling in the warm air of the castle. It was the characteristic smoke smell of cheap industrial paraffin wax mixed with animal tallow, the type of candle that emitted a lot of black soot and toxic gas harmful to the lungs. She knew that if exposed to this toxic smoke long-term, Lawrence's chest and lungs would suffer severe spasms, directly affecting his health. "Mrs. Gable, please take little Mabel to the east servant quarters and prepare hot tea and breakfast for them," Pringle commanded the elderly housekeeper standing in wait. "Wait," Florence spoke up, tightly grasping Mabel's hand. "I want my sister to be near my room. I need to take care of her." Mrs. Gable looked at Florence with the sternness of a longtime housekeeper in an aristocratic castle, but upon seeing the red-flushed hands and tired face of little Mabel, her eyes softened somewhat. She turned to look at Pringle, who had just received a slight nod from Lawrence standing on the stairs above. "Very well, Miss Mercer. I shall arrange a small room for Mabel right next to your Chandler workshop on the south ground floor. It has a warm fireplace and a direct path to the herb garden, Mrs. Gable said gently. Lawrence Ashbrook stepped down the stairs. He had taken off his traveling cloak, wearing only a white silk shirt and a black velvet waistcoat embroidered with gold thread. His face was exhausted, his gray eyes bearing the deep dark circles of a chronic insomniac. He looked at Florence with a cold and strict gaze. "Miss Mercer, from today you are the personal Chandler of Hartswood. These are the rules you must strictly follow," Lawrence said, his low voice echoing in the empty stone hall. "First, this castle is never allowed to sink into darkness. Every candle in the main hall, corridors, and my study must be replaced before they burn down a third of their length. Second, my bedroom in the West Tower is a restricted area. You are only allowed to bring candles to place at the door every late afternoon. Absolutely not stepping inside without my permission." And third, Lawrence paused, coughing lightly a few times, his face slightly pale due to the impure candle smoke spreading in the room. "You must quickly clean up the old candle workshop in the south of the castle, and begin producing your first batch of smokeless beeswax candles. I do not wish to smell this toxic smoke in my castle for another day." Florence bowed her head. "I understand your rules clearly, Your Grace. But I need sufficient materials, pure Surrey raw beeswax, herbal oils, and mineral salts to treat the wicks. Without them, I cannot guarantee the quality of the candles. Everything you need will be fully provided through Pringle. If you lack anything, report directly to him," Lawrence said decisively, then turned and walked away, his tall figure quickly disappearing behind the doors of the large study at the end of the corridor. Florence was led to her new workroom, the old Chandler workshop located on the south ground floor of the castle. The spacious room with thick stone walls featured a large copper wax-melting cauldron, long oak tables filled with molds of all sizes, and large wooden racks for drying candles. At the back of the workshop was a small door opening to the castle's herb garden, where beds of lavender, mint, and rosemary lay dormant beneath the winter snow. Florence walked around the workshop, her hands touching the wooden molds covered in the fine dust of many years of abandonment. She saw in the corner of the room preserved ceramic jars containing solidified vegetable oil and oak barrels holding old mineral salts. She and Mabel together cleaned up the dirt, scrubbing the large copper candle cauldrons with hot water and distilled vinegar until they shone brightly again. Florence patiently guided Mabel on how to sort the cotton wicks by size, braiding the 3-ply wicks very evenly so the candles would not burn unevenly when lit. The smell of damp stone dust gradually disappeared, giving way to the herbal scent and the warm, intense smell of beeswax beginning to spread. She knew the journey to resurrect her father's reputation began from this tiny stone room. She smiled slightly upon seeing Mabel starting to arrange the vials of dried essential oils on the wooden shelves. Even though this Heartswood castle was overflowing with the brilliant light of thousands of candles, Florence still sensed a profound loneliness and melancholy enveloping this place. That powerful young duke was having to live in a prison of his own making. A prison built of the fear of the night's darkness and the solitude of power. She promised herself to cast the best candles, not only to fulfill the bargain to save her and her sister's lives, but also to bring true peace to the traumatized soul of Lawrence Ashbrook. She looked out the window. A stormy wind began to rise, blowing white snowflakes to cling onto the window panes, but her heart was warm upon seeing Mabel sleeping soundly on the small bed beside the warm fireplace. She draped another thick woolen blanket over her sister, silently thanking Lawrence for giving the two sisters a warm and peaceful home amidst this harsh Yorkshire winter. Chapter 4. The fragrance of peace 2 weeks passed quickly in Florence's relentless busyness at the Heartswood Candle Workshop. Under her dexterous hands and photomedical knowledge, the old Chandler workshop was brilliantly resurrected. Barrels of the purest Surrey beeswax were delivered. Florence meticulously used a knife to scrape away the dark brown impurities on the outside, only keeping the wax as golden yellow as ripe forest honey. She melted the wax at a moderate temperature so as not to lose the pure natural fragrance of the honey, then blended into it soothing lavender essential oil, along with precious essence she had distilled herself in curved-neck glass flasks. Every day she personally checked the length of the wicks, soaking the candle wicks in Surrey mineral salt solution to create cotton threads with a durable, highly wind-resistant structure. The difference immediately appeared in Heartswood Castle. The first Mercer beeswax candles were lit in the central corridor. When burning, they did not emit a single wisp of black smoke. The yellow-orange flame was bright and steady, radiating an elegant, gentle fragrance that soothed the nervous tension of all the servants in the castle. Especially in the area of Lawrence's study, the Duke's prolonged asthma attacks had completely ceased. He began to spend more time working at night without being tormented anymore by the shortness of breath caused by the soot of industrial candles. Lawrence noticed the distinct change in the air around him. The unpleasant pungent smell from before disappeared, replaced by the cool lavender scent that soothed his inherently tense nerves. One late winter night, Florence was still working diligently beside the copper cauldron. She was testing a new wick formula interweaving copper mineral salt-soaked cotton threads to create a softer golden light for Lawrence's bedroom. Mabel had long fallen asleep in the adjacent room. The quiet space held only the sound of beeswax boiling slightly over low heat and the wind howling through the castle's stone crevices. She carefully recorded the essential oil blending ratios into a small notebook, trying to find the most perfect balance between the stress-reducing lavender scent and the pine wood scent that helped clear the respiratory tract. Suddenly, a loud noise rang out from the west tower of the castle, followed by the sound of shattering porcelain and Lawrence's hoarse, agonizing scream. Florence was startled and dropped her stirring spoon. She immediately ran out of the workshop and dashed quickly up the stone stairs toward the west tower. As she approached the Duke's bedroom, she saw Butler Pringle and 2 guards standing outside the door with faces pale from fear, but no one dared to step inside. "What happened, Mr. Pringle?" Florence asked, panting. A strong gust of wind from a broken window in the west corridor blew out the entire large candelabra in the hall outside His Grace's bedroom. His room is currently completely engulfed in darkness. Pringle said, his voice trembling. His Grace has locked the door tightly from the inside and does not allow anyone to enter. His panic attack is erupting fiercely. From inside the bedroom, Lawrence's choking gasps and frantic smashing noises rang out ever more clearly. He was imprisoned in the darkness of his own room, the hallucinations of the Waterloo dungeon besieging and suffocating his chest. Florence did not hesitate at all. She ran back to the corridor, took one of her large lavender beeswax candles burning on the wall sconce, and used her father's lighter to light that scented candle. The warm, soft golden light immediately radiated, carrying the soothing fragrance of lavender and pine wood. She stepped before Lawrence's bedroom door, pushing the thick oak door hard. The door was not completely locked. It slowly opened, revealing a vast space entirely engulfed in pitch black and freezing darkness. The wind howling through the corridor window crevices made the curtains flap violently like giant night birds. In the corner of the bedroom by the large bed, Lawrence was kneeling on the freezing stone floor, his hands tightly gripping his messy hair, his chest heaving violently like a drowning man. His gray eyes widened, staring in panic into the endless void of darkness, completely losing his usual cold, imposing demeanor. "Your Grace Lawrence," Florence whispered. She stepped slowly into the room, her two hands holding the brilliantly burning candle so its gentle light illuminated his face and dispelled the surrounding darkness. "Get out. Do not look at me, the darkness, they are coming," Lawrence roared hoarsely, his body trembling violently. He tried to retreat deeper into the dark corner of the wall. Florence did not back away. She placed the candle on the small stone table beside the bed. The warm golden light immediately enveloped the bedroom corner. She approached Lawrence, kneeling beside him on the cold stone floor. She gently but resolutely grasped the violently trembling hands of the Duke. Lawrence's hands were large and full of the calluses of a battlefield soldier, but right now they were as cold as ice. Florence's small hands, warm with the scent of herbal beeswax, gripped his hands tightly. She gently stroked his fingers, transmitting the warmth of life and faith into his soul. "Look at me, Lawrence. Look at this flame." Florence spoke calmly, her voice gentle like a spring breeze, carrying a strangely soothing power. "There is no dungeon. You are at Heartswood Castle. You are safe. Smell this lavender scent." Lawrence trembled as he looked into Florence's calm and steadfast gray eyes, then looked at the golden flame burning steadily on the Mercer beeswax candle. The pure herbal scent spread throughout the space, quickly dispelling the burnt smoke smell of the previously extinguished candles. His fiercely constricting chest began to relax. His breathing slowed down, becoming more even beneath the warmth from Florence's hands, transmitting through his flesh. Her gentle touch was like a sturdy anchor, keeping him tethered to reality, dispelling the gloomy darkness and the roaring sounds of the Waterloo battlefield. Florence reached out to gently stroke the sweat-drenched, messy strands of hair on his forehead, coaxing him like coaxing a lost child in a stormy night. After 10 long minutes of silence, Lawrence completely calmed down. He let out a long sigh, relaxing his hands that were gripping hers tightly. He looked at Florence at close range, for the first time perceiving the gentle and warm presence of this candle-making girl, right in his most private space. "Florence," Lawrence whispered, his voice no longer bearing the cold authority but full of exhaustion and deep hidden vulnerability. "I am here, Your Grace. The light will always be here." Florence smiled slightly, her fingers still gently gripping his hand, to keep him feeling the connection and the warmth of life. In that moment, amidst the freezing darkness of the Heartswood West Tower, only the Mercer beeswax candle shone shimmeringly, warming two scarred souls of life who were drawing closer to each other than ever before. Chapter 5: The Dances in the Shadows. After the turbulent night at the West Tower, a tacit, very slight but distinct change rippled through Heartswood Castle. Lawrence no longer appeared with the ruthlessly cold exterior as before, especially when facing Florence. He silently allowed her free access to the large library of the castle to look up ancient botanical documents, while concurrently ordering Mrs. Gable to prepare the highest quality meals for little Mabel. Florence began to spend late afternoons at the library, where she found thick leather-bound books on the flora of Surrey and the history of wild bees. She immersed herself in the world of knowledge, searching for herbal essential oil extraction formulas to improve the quality of the candles. One afternoon, as she was carefully turning the pages of an ancient book illustrating lavender, Lawrence slowly stepped in. He was not wearing his usual black leather gloves, his face more relaxed beneath the soft light casting through the window. He stood beside her, discussing beeswax formulas together. That was the first time the two shared stories of the past Lawrence, recounting the freezing nights on the Spanish battlefield, where he craved a spark of warming light, while Florence spoke of her resilient father Albert, who taught her to love every single candle wick. The silent empathy between them grew, transcending the boundaries of status. However, the class divide between an illustrious duke and a fallen candlemaker was still an unbridgeable chasm in the eyes of the Mayfair aristocracy visiting the castle to prepare for the upcoming social season. One late afternoon, thick fog enveloped the pathways. Lawrence sent Pringle to bring to the Chandler workshop a small name card exquisitely trimmed in gold. It was an invitation for Florence to have a private dinner with him in the main hall of the castle. His Grace wishes to test the burn and scent throw of the new batch of lavender beeswax candles in the vast space of the banquet hall, Pringle said, his demeanor remaining somber, but his eyes now carrying a few degrees of respect for the girl who had saved his master from the night panic attack. Florence stood before the large bronze mirror in her small room. She only had a frayed gray-blue woolen evening gown, a keepsake from the time before her family went bankrupt. She carefully smoothed out the wrinkles on the sleeves, brushed her long chestnut hair, and pinned it neatly behind her head with a simple oak wood pin. Her hands, despite bearing slight wax burns and calluses, were absolutely clean and carried the faint, pure scent of honey and cedarwood. As she stepped into the large banquet hall, Florence was already seated at the head of the long, antique black oak table. The vast room was completely illuminated by Mercer beeswax candles placed on 2 large 10-branched brass candelabras. The soft golden light from the candles cast upon the ancient portrait paintings hanging on the stone walls, creating a warm, tranquil space entirely devoid of soot and dust. Lawrence raised his eyes to look at Florence entering. His gaze lingered on her frayed woolen gown for a moment too long, but there was no contempt in his eyes, only a quiet warmth. He stood up, personally pulling out the wooden chair at the opposite end of the long table for her, a courteous act exceeding the usual rules for a servant. "Thank you for accepting the invitation, Miss Mercer," Lawrence said, his voice warmer than usual. The meal was served with simple yet exquisite dishes. Lawrence did not speak much during the first half of the meal. He intently observed the flames from the Mercer candles burning steadily on the sconces. The yellow-orange flame was bright and clear, the wick self-consuming evenly without the need to use candle snuffers frequently, and the cooling fragrance of dried lavender wafting helped the dining room atmosphere become incredibly relaxed. "These candles are truly excellent," Lawrence spoke to break the silence. "They have a very distinct wick structure. How many years did your father spend researching it?" "Over 10 years, Your Grace," Florence replied, her eyes shining with pride when mentioning her father. "My father always believed that light was not only to illuminate the eyes, but also to soothe the soul. He tested hundreds of mineral salts from the Cumbria quarries to find the wick-soaking formula that prevented the flame from being easily blown out by the wind. He called it the resilient flame." Lawrence nodded slightly. He lifted his wineglass but did not drink, his long fingers lightly gripping the glass stem. A man of such intellect and dedication, it is a pity to have suffered an unjust end in the debtor's dungeon. My father was framed by greedy men wanting to monopolize the royal candle supply market. Lord Cedric used forged words to poison my father's reputation before the court, Florence said, her voice choking slightly, her hands tightly gripping the white napkin on her lap. "I know," Florence said in a low voice, "and I am reinvestigating that entire case. Those behind the plot to poison the royals with toxic candles shall pay a heavy price." Just then, the large doors of the banquet hall suddenly opened. Lord Cedric Ashbrook entered along with Lady Gwendolen, a beautiful but arrogant noblewoman belonging to a rival family seeking a political alliance with Hartswood. They had arrived at the castle upon a social invitation from the previous week. Gwendolen raised a contemptuous eyebrow upon seeing Florence sitting and eating opposite the Duke. She approached, using a feather fan to conceal half her face, speaking mockingly, "Your Grace Florence, I did not expect Hartswood Castle to have such a strange new rule. A lowly candlemaker from the East End is allowed to sit at the aristocratic dining table and dine with the Royal Chancellor of the Exchequer. This is truly an insult to the Mayfair families." Cedric stood beside her, smirking maliciously. He tapped his silver-knobbed cane against the stone floor. "My niece is correct, Lawrence. You are lowering your title by indulging the daughter of a poisoner who died in the dungeon. Could it be you have been blinded by these frivolous herbal scents?" Florence stood up, intending to curtsy and withdraw to avoid causing conflict for Lawrence, but he quickly raised his hand to stop her. His gray eyes flashed with a look as cold as ice sweeping over the two newcomers. "Cedric Gwendolen," Lawrence spoke in a low, cold, highly authoritative voice. "Florence Mercer is the personal chandler of this castle, under my direct patronage. Her talent brings light and peace to Hartswood, a feat no Mayfair aristocrat could accomplish. And at this dining table, I decide who is qualified to stay seated. If you two feel uncomfortable, the castle doors are always open to see guests off." Gwendolen's face paled with anger and humiliation. She hurriedly turned her face away, not daring to utter another word. Cedric let out a dry laugh, concealing the fury in his heart before leading his niece to sit down at the far corner of the banquet table. The meal continued in a solemn, quiet atmosphere, beneath the resilient, shimmering light of the Mercer candles. Florence sat down, a feeling of indescribable warmth swelling in her heart at Lawrence's fierce protection for her. Chapter 6. The fracture of trust. Winter at Hartswood grew increasingly harsh. The snowy winds and ants howled outside the gray stone walls of the castle, but inside Florence's chandler workshop, the air remained warm and fragrant with herbs. Florence was meticulously checking the final batches of lavender beeswax candles in preparation for the upcoming Grand Winter Ball, the grandest event of the year at Hartswood Castle, to welcome high society guests and the royal delegation. She felt the peace and freedom in every breath at this place, a beautiful new life gradually blooming. She had begun to trust the profound Duke, the man who had stepped forward to defend her honor against the humiliation of Cedric and Gwendolen. However, her peace was shattered one late afternoon when Mabel brought into the workshop a small letter wrapped in a gray wax envelope bearing no family crest. "Sister Florence, an elderly gardener, gave me this letter near the rose hedges. He said it was a very important document concerning our father," Mabel said, her small eyes looking anxiously at her sister. Florence received the letter, a vague unease swelling in her heart. She carefully peeled open the gray wax envelope. Inside was an old piece of parchment, yellowed at the corners. Upon opening it, Florence immediately recognized this as a copy of the decree confiscating the assets and sealing the Mercer candle workshop of her father 2 years ago. But what made her heart seemingly stop beating was the bottom corner of this document. In the signature section approving the confiscation and transferring control of the Mercer candle workshop to Lord Cedric, there was a red wax seal bearing the crest of Hartswood, a shield inlaid with a shooting star, and a scrawled handwritten signature clearly in black ink, "Lawrence Ashbrook." Florence felt the whole world around her spinning. Her mind went blank, her breath catching in her throat. Lawrence's signature, the Duke who had brought her and her sister to the castle, who had promised to protect her and vindicate her father, was actually the one who had signed the death sentence for her family's candle workshop. Her tears instantly welled up, blurring the lines of text on the parchment. She recalled his profound gaze beneath the candlelight, his gentle gestures when she warmed his hands in the West Tower. Was it all just a perfectly orchestrated charade to exploit her trust? She felt so foolish for believing that a noble duke would genuinely care for an impoverished girl from the East End slums. Every warm word, every gentle gesture from before, suddenly became sharp blades piercing through her heart. A small attached note fell out of the envelope. It was the hastily scribbled handwriting of Cedric Ashbrook. "Dear Miss Mercer, have you ever wondered why your noble duke suddenly brought you to the castle and provided you with everything? He did not save you out of kindness. He only wants to use your father's exclusive wick and beeswax formula to fulfill the royal investigation and curry favor with the king, while simultaneously covering up his own crime of confiscating the Mercer estate in the past. You are merely a tool in his hands." Suspicion was like a potent poison, quickly gnawing at and destroying every bit of trust that Florence had painstakingly built toward Lawrence over the past 2 weeks. The memories of the West Tower night, the warm hands grasping hers, the silent promises, all suddenly became fake and terrifying in her eyes. He kept her at the castle only to exploit her talent, using her as a pawn to serve his aristocratic connections? The agonizing pain of betrayal from the past rushed back, suffocating her soul. She did not want to believe it, but that signature, that wax seal was real. It was clear and sharp, undeniable. She looked at the copper cauldron boiling wax, her heart full of bitterness. "Sister Florence, what's wrong?" "Are you crying?" Mabel asked in panic upon seeing her sister trembling violently, her face pale without a drop of blood. Florence stood silently before the copper cauldron flickering with red flames, her heart aching as she looked at Mabel's small figure bewilderedly waiting for her sister. She recalled her childhood years in London, when her father Mercer Albert was still a proud artisan of the Royal Candle Workshop. In those days, their home was always filled with laughter and the sweet scent of pure Surrey beeswax. But when disaster struck, when her father was thrown into the dungeon, even their closest Mayfair neighbors immediately turned a blind eye, even insulting the two sisters as the blood of a murderer. Florence had sworn before her father's spirit that she would use her very life to shelter and protect Mabel, not letting the little girl endure any more injustice or humiliation. Lawrence's presence had once been the sole hope illuminating her dark life, but now the cold signature on that decree had shattered everything. She felt utterly disgusted by the fake aristocratic world, where her trust was exploited like merchandise traded for power. Mabel Florence wiped away her tears, her voice choking but decisive. "Pack your bags. We cannot stay in this castle for another second. We must leave. But there is a huge blizzard outside." Sister Mabel looked out the window, where snowflakes were blinding the sky in the howling gale. "I do not care." Florence clutched the forged document tightly in her hand, her heart overflowing with agony and betrayal. I would rather freeze to death out there than stay here, as a tool for the man who destroyed our father. Florence quickly packed the meager personal belongings of the two sisters into an old woolen bag. She looked at the wax-melting copper cauldron, still swaying its small flame, looked at the oak molds filled with the Mercer-scented beeswax candles that were cooling. Her heart ached as if being sliced. She had once thought this place would be home, the Mercer Candle Workshop resurrected under Laurence's protection. But it was all just an elaborate deception. Florence pulled Mabel's hand, silently walking out of the Chandler workshop through the south side door. They stepped into the pitch-black and freezing night of the herb garden. The blizzard immediately descended, lashing icy snowflakes against the faces and small bodies of the two sisters trying to walk in desperation, the snow burying up to their ankles, making every step incredibly heavy. Florence tried to lead her sister away, ignoring the flesh-cutting cold gnawing at her body. She only wanted to escape this dark castle rife with lies. The memories of Laurence's warmth seemingly vanished into nothingness, leaving only the bone-chilling cold of the wild Yorkshire winter night. Chapter 7. The Flame Withstanding the Storm. The most ferocious winter blizzard in 10 years had completely isolated Hartswood Castle from the outside world. The snow fell so thickly it obscured all pathways, strong winds howling through the crevices of the ancient stone walls. At that moment, the castle's main coal heating system in the basement unexpectedly suffered a toxic gas leak, forcing Butler Pringle to order the fires extinguished to ensure everyone's safety. Hartswood Castle quickly plunged into bone-chilling cold. Each solid stone room, previously warmed, now became as freezing as an ice cave. The ruthless cold of the Yorkshire winter began to seep deep into every nook and cranny of Hartswood Castle. Without the operating coal heating system, the thick, originally solid granite walls now radiated a freezing cold draft like ice. The servants' breaths froze into white mist whenever they spoke. Butler Pringle had to constantly order the servants to bring more thick woolen blankets to cover the stone statues and protect the precious mahogany furniture from cracking due to the sudden drop in temperature. The castle that was once resplendent with light was now engulfed in an overwhelmingly gloomy, silent and terrifyingly cold atmosphere, resembling an abandoned stone tomb amidst the desolate snowy hills. Even more horrifying, a large glass window in the west corridor was completely blown in by the stormy wind. The fierce cold draft rushed into the corridor, extinguishing the entire main candle lighting system leading to the west tower. Lawrence Ashbrook's bedroom was instantly plunged into pitch-black darkness in just a few seconds. Your Grace, Lawrence." Pringle banged on the Duke's bedroom door from the outside, but received no answer, only the howling wind and the agonizing, terrified gasps echoing from within. Lawrence's nyctophobia panic attack was erupting at its most violent ever. His chest tightened, preventing him from calling for help. The dense darkness suffocated his bronchi, dragging him back to the horrifying memories of the desolate Waterloo dungeon, where he was imprisoned in solitude and impending death. Meanwhile, in the South Herb Garden, Florence and Mabel were battling the blizzard. The snow was knee-deep. The bone-chilling cold quickly paralyzed little Mabel's feet. The little girl collapsed onto the snow, her lips purple from the cold. Florence tried to lift Mabel up with all the last remaining strength of a sister. The snowy wind lashed directly at her face, freezing her eyelashes solid with ice, and the deep blizzard made every step feel as heavy as lead. Her fabric gloves were soaked and frozen solid, her scratched hands aching to the bone. However, the image of Mabel fading away from the cold on her shoulder infused her with an extraordinary willpower. She bit her lip until it bled, using the astringent sweet taste of blood as motivation to not collapse onto the white snow. In her mind at this moment, there was only a single thought. She had to bring Mabel back to the warm stone hall of the castle, where her Mercer candle was still emitting its resilient, jewel-like golden light leading the way. "Florence, I cannot walk anymore. It's so cold," Mabel whispered, her eyes beginning to close from exhaustion. Florence panicked. She knelt down, hugging her sister tightly, trying to rub the little girl's freezing hands. She realized she had been too impulsive to lead her sister to flee in such a fierce blizzard. She looked back at the main castle in the distance. The light from her Mercer candle lit in the ground floor corridor was still burning resiliently amidst the blizzard, emitting a warm jewel-like golden streak guiding the path. That was the flame she cast with all her father's love and craftsmanship, a flame that defied all storms. Disregarding the heartbreak of suspicion, the instinct to protect her sister, and a sudden anxiety for Lawrence being isolated in the castle's darkness propelled her. Florence lifted Mabel up, using her last bit of strength to wade through the deep snow, running back to the castle guided by the light of the Mercer candle. Her legs were numb, her breath rapid and freezing in her chest, but she did not stop. That jewel-like golden light was like a solitary lighthouse guiding her past the brink of death. As she pushed open the side door and stepped into the warm stone hall, Pringle and Mrs. Gable immediately ran over to receive the unconscious Mabel. They quickly wrapped the little girl in hot woolen blankets beside the large kitchen stove. Florence was panting, her face drained of all color. She heard the smashing noises emanating from the west tower. "Your Grace, Lawrence is in danger. His panic attack has erupted in the darkness of the west tower." Pringle cried out in utter helplessness. Florence immediately snatched one of her large, lavender beeswax candles from the hall table, lit it and dashed quickly up the stone stairs. She rushed into Lawrence's bedroom, where he was kneeling prostrate on the floor, his entire body trembling frantically, and his breathing erratic in the pitch-black darkness. The room was freezing cold, and the stormy wind blew the black velvet curtains wildly. Florence ran over to kneel beside him, hugging his trembling shoulders, placing the bright candle close to his pale face. "Lawrence, Lawrence, look at me." "I have returned," Florence cried aloud, her voice ringing out warmly. Seeing the soft golden light and Florence's tear-drenched face, Lawrence jolted awake from the Waterloo hallucination. He reached out and hugged her tightly into his chest, resting his head on her shoulder, panting. The warmth of the two and the pure lavender scent soothed the emotional storm in his heart. He gripped her tightly as if afraid that if he let go, he would be besieged by the darkness forever. His heartbeat gradually stabilized under the gentle, caressing gesture of her hands. When Lawrence had completely calmed down, he saw the old document falling out from her pocket. He picked it up to look, then immediately understood everything. He stood up, walked to the large writing desk, opened his confidential document chest, and took out an original document bearing his genuine signature in the natural ink of the Hartswood estate, placing it beside that forged document. "Look, my genuine signature always has a double underline and the estate's yellow sunken wax seal. This document was forged by Cedric with my signature to divide us and force you to leave the castle. He knows I need your light to survive. He wants to push me into a panic trap to seize the estate," Lawrence said in a low voice, his eyes looking at her full of sincerity and pain. Florence looked at the two signatures side by side beneath the candlelight. Cedric's forged signature had rigid strokes, lacking the natural, free-flowing elegance of the genuine signature. All misunderstandings vanished completely. She nodded slightly, placing her warm hand over Lawrence's hand. "I believe you, Lawrence. I am sorry for doubting you." Lawrence squeezed her hand tightly, his gaze steadfastly looking at the Mercer flame burning steadily amidst the stormy night. He knew that this flame not only illuminated Hartswood Castle, but also illuminated the future path of them both, guiding them through all the storms of life. Chapter 8. The Grand Ball Trap. A busy atmosphere enveloped Hartswood Castle when there was less than a day left until the Grand Winter Ball. Servants bustled about wiping the brass candelabras, decorating the main hall with green pine branches and deep red velvet curtains. Florence and her sister Mabel worked continuously in the Chandler workshop to prepare 200 specialized lavender beeswax candles. The main light source for the Grand Ball where the lords and the royal diplomatic delegation would appear. However, her sharp intuition and long-time candlemaking experience helped Florence discover an ominous anomaly in the afternoon before the banquet night. When she stepped into the castle's candle storage room to prepare to move the candles to the main hall, she saw 5 wooden barrels containing candles already stacked in the corner of the room. A new servant, one who frequently loitered near Cedric's room, was quickly cleaning up the wax scraps on the floor. "These are the Mercer candles prepared for the main hall, are they not?" Florence asked, her eyes looking sharply at the wooden barrels. "Yes, Miss Mercer, I have just moved them from the workshop up here under Pringle's orders." The servant stammered his reply, his shifty eyes avoiding looking straight at her before hurriedly backing out. Florence approached one wooden barrel and opened the lid. The candles inside had a golden yellow color and an outward appearance identical to her beeswax candles. But when she picked up a candle, she immediately frowned. The weight of this candle was significantly heavier than a standard pure beeswax candle of the same size. She used her fingernail to lightly scrape the wax layer at the base of the candle. A layer of fine dark gray powder appeared beneath the yellow wax. Florence brought the powder layer to her nose to smell, then lightly touched the tip of her tongue to it. The slightly brackish, astringent taste characteristic of chemical lead salts and cheap phosphorus powder immediately transmitted to her taste nerves. Lead-laced wax, Florence whispered, her face paling. Cedric had bribed the servant to swap all her beeswax candles with this toxic type of candle. When burning, this lead-laced wax layer would emit a large amount of toxic smoke that was colorless and odorless but extremely harmful to the lungs, especially for someone with respiratory sensitivity like Florence. Furthermore, the core wick of these candles had been soaked with an amount of impure phosphorus powder, a substance that would cause the flame to flare up very strongly initially but easily extinguish after only an hour of burning, and emit a foul black smoke when there was a strong draft. Cedric wanted to use this batch of toxic candles to weaken Florence's physical condition right during the ball night, while simultaneously orchestrating the extinguishing of the candles to trigger the Duke's darkness panic attack before the guests, aiming to prove Florence incapacitated and seize control of the family's tin mines. "Sister Florence, what is the matter?" Mabel stepped into the candle storage room, asking anxiously upon seeing Florence's serious complexion. "Mabel, we are facing a massive trap," Florence said quickly, her whispered voice full of urgency. "Cedric has swapped all our candles with lead-laced toxic candles. If these candles are lit in the banquet hall tonight, Florence will suffer life-threatening lung spasms when the toxic smoke accumulates. Then we must inform Mr. Pringle and his grace immediately." Mabel panicked. "We must not," Florence held her sister's shoulders. "We have no direct evidence to accuse Cedric here, and if we raise the alarm now, Cedric will find a way to destroy the evidence and falsely accuse us in reverse of being the ones who made this batch of toxic candles. We must resolve this ourselves." Florence looked at the large grandfather clock in the corner of the room. There were only 4 hours left until the banquet began. 200 pure beeswax candles had been swapped. She could not possibly cast 200 new large candles in such a short amount of time using conventional methods. "Mabel, listen to me." Florence looked straight into her sister's eyes, her gaze flashing with the resolute flame of her father from years ago. "We will use the special batch of beeswax stored separately in the workshop, the specialized forest beeswax distilled with finely ground sparkling phosphorescent mineral powder from deep-sea shells and pine wood essential oil. We will melt the wax very quickly, using the double-core molding technique to create special wind-resistant wick candles. With just 50 of these large candles placed at choke points around the ballroom, we will protect Florence's light. I will help you prepare the wicks and the wick-soaking mineral salts." Mabel nodded bravely. The two sisters hastily returned to the Chandler workshop. The flame beneath the copper cauldron was blown up to full capacity by Florence. The specialized pale yellow beeswax mixture began to melt, radiating the pure scent of pine wood and carrying a gentle shimmer under the daylight. Florence carefully poured the natural deep-sea shell phosphorescent powder into the wax pot, stirring evenly so the mineral powder dispersed evenly without settling. She recalled her father's teachings about the sensitivity of wax when mixed with minerals. If the stirring hand was uneven, the wax would clump and clog the wick. Mabel quickly soaked the cotton wicks in the wind-resistant copper mineral salt solution, then dried them by the fireplace. The two sisters were dripping with sweat, their cheeks flushed red from the intense heat of the furnace. Florence used the large wooden spoon to stir continuously, the air in the workshop oppressively hot. She recalled her father's instructions about controlling the flame beneath the copper pot. If the wax was too hot, it would lose the pure herbal essential oil. If too cool, the wax would not adhere well to the double-core layer. She carefully adjusted the terracotta furnace's ventilation valve. Her hands suffered wax burns in a few places, but she did not stop for a single second. Every minute, every second passed in extreme tension. Florence poured the hot wax into the double-core oak molds, a technique demanding absolute precision to keep the candle wick always centered exactly between 2 layers of wax with different densities. Sweat dripped profusely on Florence's forehead. Her hands suffered wax burns in a few places, but she did not feel any pain. In her mind at this moment there was only a single thought. She had to protect Florence, protect his light against Cedric's malicious darkness. She knew that if she was careless even slightly, Florence's flame would be extinguished and his life would be threatened. As the first oil lamp in the castle corridor was lit, signaling the start of the ball, Florence and Mabel also just finished the 50th specialized candle. She carefully arranged them into a large rattan basket, covered them with a woolen cloth, preparing to enter the battle to protect the light at the Hartswood Grand Hall. She smiled slightly, looking at her sister. Both breathed a sigh of relief, but knew the greatest challenge was waiting ahead. Chapter 9. The Unique Dancing Light. The Hartswood Castle Grand Hall was unprecedentedly resplendent beneath the light of hundreds of large candles lit along the walls and on the colossal crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. The Mayfair high society in their glittering, extravagant evening wear were conversing merrily, the sound of laughter and melodious symphony music echoing throughout the room. However, Lawrence Ashbrook sat at the head position, above the banquet hall with a tense face, his chest occasionally tightening slightly, due to the colorless toxic smoke smell beginning to spread from the large chandeliers. Cedric Ashbrook stood at the corner of the ballroom with Lady Gwendolen, his eyes full of triumph upon seeing Lawrence beginning to cough lightly and the Duke's face gradually becoming pale. "Prepare to act," Cedric whispered to the subordinate standing near the large west window. Just then, Florence stepped into the banquet hall from the side aisle. She wore the frayed gray-blue woolen gown, but her posture was incredibly proud and composed. In her hands was the rattan basket containing the specialized candles. She quickly walked around the ballroom, silently placing her 50 wind-resistant beeswax candles onto the small, stone-inlaid sconces at wind-sheltered corners, and around the main dance floor, replacing the partially burned lead-laced candles. Suddenly, a loud crash rang out from the large west window. Two of Cedric's subordinates had roughly pushed open the iron window. The freezing winter stormy wind and white snow immediately rushed into the grand hall like a wild beast. The howling wind blew across the vast room. The excessively strong wind combined with the poor quality core wicks of the lead-laced candles caused all the lights on the large crystal chandeliers and wall sconces to simultaneously extinguish in a single second. The entire Hartswood Grand Hall plunged into pitch black and freezing darkness. The panicked screams of the noble ladies rang out, the chaotic sound of shattering glasses. The London high society lost their bearings in the sudden darkness. They pushed and shoved each other looking for an escape route in utter panic. In the center of the banquet hall, Lawrence Ashbrook collapsed beside the head chair. The fierce nyctophobia panic attack erupted instantly, suffocating his bronchi, causing him to pant in agony, both hands tightly gripping his head. The darkness and howling stormy wind triggered hallucinations of the freezing Waterloo dungeon, imprisoning his mind in boundless despair. Cedric laughed aloud in the darkness. He called out loudly, "Lawrence has lost control. His madness is erupting in the darkness. He is no longer sane enough to manage this Hartswood castle. Take him away." But Cedric's cunning voice was abruptly halted by a miraculous sight. From 50 positions around the ballroom and the main floor, Florence's specialized beeswax candles were not blown out by the stormy wind at all. Conversely, her copper mineral salt-soaked wicks burned extremely resiliently against the strong wind, radiating a soft yellow-tinged jade-green light. Even more wonderfully, the wax layer containing natural phosphorescent mineral powder from deep-sea shells began to emit a soothingly cool, shimmering glow when the darkness descended, creating 50 glimmering light spots, like winter night constellations hovering amidst the dark grand hall. The gentle light and warm pine wood fragrance spread, completely dispelling the acrid lead smoke. Florence held the largest specialized candle burning brilliantly in her hand. She proudly walked through the crowd of astonished aristocrats, heading straight toward Lawrence kneeling on the floor. She knelt beside him, placing the warm Mercer candle close to his face. Her small hands gently lifted the trembling face of the Duke. "Lawrence, look at me, my flame is always here to protect you," Florence said gently, her voice ringing out clearly amidst the silent grand hall. Looking into Florence's resolute gray eyes and the soft golden light of the Mercer candle, Lawrence immediately snapped out of his panic attack. His breathing stabilized, his body ceased trembling. He stood up straight, the imposing, majestic demeanor of the Duke of Hartswood instantly returning beneath the shimmering light of the Mercer candle. He grasped Florence's hand, leading her onto the main dance floor in the middle of the grand hall, beneath the sole gentle and warm phosphorescent light of her specialized beeswax candles. Lawrence bowed to her in the classic aristocratic dance etiquette, then placed his hand on her waist, leading her into a graceful waltz before the utter silence and astonishment of the entire Mayfair aristocracy. The two danced rhythmically amidst the darkness of the grand hall, surrounded by the shimmering light of the Mercer candles as if they were dancing amidst the night stars. Every dance step of the two was incredibly in sync, her gray-blue skirt swirling lightly beneath the cooling phosphorescent light, creating an unprecedentedly romantic image. Florence looked at her gently, his eyes no longer bearing their gloomy look but overflowing with silent trust and love. Their waltz seemed to paint a magical picture amidst the grand hall, proving that no darkness could hinder the understanding between them. The surrounding crowd watched in silence, the whispering gossip completely vanishing, making way for deep admiration for her dignity and talent. Every turning motion, every light gliding beat on the stone floor, exuded a natural aristocratic elegance of the candlemaking girl who had illuminated the Duke's soul. As the dance concluded, Florence turned to look at Cedric standing frozen in the corner of the room, with a gray face as his plan completely collapsed. He stepped forward decisively, striking his ebony cane hard against the stone floor, his low voice echoing throughout the banquet hall. "Cedric, you may use storms and darkness to extinguish the lights of this castle, but the flame of Heartswood's honor, and the woman I choose shall never be extinguished. Florence Mercer protected me against your despicable plot, and she is the one with the highest position in this castle. I shall protect her honor and talent with all my power." The powerful Duke's ironclad declaration of protection echoed throughout the grand hall, shattering all the contempt and humiliation the high society had held towards Florence all this time, forcing everyone to bow their heads in reverence to the courageous Mercer girl. Florence smiled, looking at Lawrence, her hand tightly intertwining with his beneath the resilient shimmering light of the Mercer candle. Chapter 10. The dawn of Heartswood under Lawrence's decisive direction. The investigation into Cedric Ashbrook's plot to forge documents and poison Heartswood Castle proceeded rapidly with the participation of the most prestigious investigators. The subordinate caught red-handed swapping the toxic candles immediately confessed Cedric's entire plot under the strict investigative pressure of the local magistrate. The document forging Lawrence's signature along with the illegal financial reports of Cedric's industrial candle workshops were completely exposed before the royal legal authority. The ending for the wicked was incredibly ruthless and fair. Lord Cedric Ashbrook was stripped of all his aristocratic titles, his assets confiscated to compensate the victims of the poisonings, and he was permanently exiled from England to be banished to the remote colonies in the South Indian Ocean. Lady Gwendolen and the rival family were thoroughly boycotted by the Mayfair High Society, barred from all social events of the new season in London. In contrast to the villain's downfall, the reputation of the Mercer lineage was fully restored. Lawrence submitted to the king the documents proving the innocence of the late Albert Mercer from years ago. However, before Florence officially became the Duchess of Heartswood, Lawrence wanted to give her the most glorious recognition for her independent talent. He wanted to prove to the entire aristocratic society that she sat in that position through her own outstanding ability and resilient dignity, not merely due to the marital status with a duke. On a warm spring morning, as the gentle rays of sunlight shone through the glass windows of the chandler workshop on the south ground floor of the castle, Lawrence walked in with butler Pringle, who was lifting a large silver tray covered in red velvet cloth. On the tray was a golden-laid brass plaque engraved with the royal crest and sharp text. After receiving the prestigious appointment decree, Florence Mercer immediately set to work restructuring and expanding the royal candle workshop right within the Heartswood grounds. Lawrence specifically ordered the carpenters to craft large copper wax-melting cauldrons and the most modern wick-trimming tables to support her work. Florence decided not to work alone. She sent letters back to London to take in 4 young orphaned girls from the impoverished East End dock slums, those who had experienced the same agonizing hunger and cold as her and her sister years ago. Florence patiently guided them in every wick-braiding technique, how to discern the purity of Surrey beeswax, and how to blend natural herbal essential oils. The Heartswood Chandler Workshop was now not only a place producing light for the royals, but also became a free vocational school, igniting hope and a new life for fallen young souls. Lawrence looked at Florence, carefully untangling the new candle wicks. He smiled warmly and approached. He personally lifted the brass plaque, handing it to her and declaring resoundingly, "Florence Mercer, by official edict from the king and the approval of the Royal Art Society, you are officially appointed as the Royal Chandler of Heartswood. This is the recognition for your photomedical talent and your own bravery, independent of any marital title." Florence was astonished receiving the glittering brass plaque. Her pale gray eyes welled with tears of happiness. This was exactly her father's greatest wish from years ago, to restore the Mercer family honor through genuine candle-making hands and intellect. This brass plaque certified her as the official candlemaker, supplying candles to the British royals. wiping clean every stigma that Cedric had smeared upon her family. Mabel and she hugged each other tightly, clear laughter echoing throughout the candle workshop, overflowing with sweet lavender scent. Lawrence stood beside her, silently watching her, his eyes overflowing with boundless pride and love for the woman who had saved his life. This appointment was the ironclad testament to her independent talent, laying a solid foundation for her status before the London aristocracy, before she officially stepped into the Duke's family. Spring knocked on the doors of Hartswood Castle, banishing the freezing snow and bringing lush green shoots to the South Herb Garden. The first lavender flowers began to bloom, radiating their fragrant scent beneath the warm spring sunlight. The wedding ceremony of Lawrence Ashbrook and Florence Mercer was held magnificently right in the Grand Hall of Hartswood Castle, on a warm April full moon night. The entire castle no longer had a single industrial candle. Instead, tens of thousands of the purest Mercer beeswax candles burned shimmeringly along the corridors and banquet hall, radiating the soothingly cool fragrance of lavender and cedarwood. Florence walked down the aisle of the castle chapel, draped in a white silk wedding dress exquisitely embroidered with gold thread patterns. Her hands, warm and confident, were placed into Lawrence's large hands before the sacred altar. She stepped up not only as a new bride, but also as the proud royal chandler of Hartswood. The London aristocracy, those who had once mocked her as the daughter of a toxic candlemaker, now all bowed their heads respectfully as she passed, addressing her with full reverence. "Your Grace, Duchess of Hartswood." On their wedding night in the West Tower, Florence's phosphorescent wax candles still radiated their gentle light in the corners of the room, banishing all darkness but not causing any discomfort to Lawrence's breathing. The Duke hugged his wife tightly into his chest, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. The two stood together by the windowsill, looking out at the sparkling starry night sky of the Yorkshire region. "Florence," Lawrence whispered softly in her ear beneath the warm light. "You are the most resilient candle, illuminating my entire dark life. From now on, the darkness of Hartswood shall never be able to frighten me again, for I have my own light." Florence smiled happily. She hugged him, sensing the peaceful beat of their two hearts, synchronizing beneath the shimmering golden light of the Mercer candle, the flame of love and honor that would never extinguish. She knew that from now on, this home would always be filled with the warm light of true love and peaceful understanding, overcoming all freezing dark nights of life together. Lawrence hugged her tighter. Outside the window, thousands of stars twinkled as if blessing the enduring happiness of the two.